Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to week 5 of this hands-on with Maxon beginners cinema 4D workshop. Let me just get my presentation up. How's it going, Matt? How you feeling?
It's all right, thank you. Yeah, it's good. Looking forward to, I know what will be your favourite
Oh,
episode of the show.
definitely. I mean, it's no secret that it's MoGraph is definitely my favorite week. Okay, so for anyone who is new, this hands-on series is to get you guys comfortable in Cinema 4D in just 6 weeks. And so we split this down into 6 different topics. So week 1, we had like a getting started where we looked at, like the layout, navigating Cinema 4D, things like primitives and deformers. And then we went on to week 2, which was modeling. Looked at splines, generators, box modeling, all that kind of fun stuff. Week 3, we then got into some creating some like materials and lighting our scene. And then week 4, which was last week, we looked at animation and dynamics. And so, as you guys know, we record these and they're actually on unlisted playlists on YouTube. So if you guys want access to any of those previous weeks, if you missed those, let us know now and we can just sort of make those available for you guys. That's not a problem. And yeah, as Matt said, week 5 is all things to do with MoGraph. So, definitely my favorite week. And then next week, we're going to round everything off with some rendering using, standard physical and also some Redshift. So, yes, week 5 MoGraph. So, let's have a little look at the kind of objectives for today. The plan will be to basically understand how the MoGraph workflow works. So there's a particular kind of way in which our objects and our generators and our MoGraph tools have to be kind of like fitting together. And this is called the MoGraph workflow. And so, we're going to take a look at that. But once we know that, the workflow is the same no matter what kind of MoGraph kind of scene you're creating. We're also going to have a look at the cloner. So we had a little look at it last week. We had a little bit of like a teaser, but we really just scratched the surface, and it has multiple possibilities, which we're going to take a look at. We're then going to learn what effectors are, so what they are, how we can use them, and using them in a couple of different setups. And we're going to develop an initial understanding of fields within MoGraph. And when I say initial, I mean fields have so many purposes. So Matt's going to show us a whole bunch of use cases for fields. So we're going to be looking specifically at fields within MoGraph. We're also going to understand how to use the Voronoi Fracture tool because it is like a really fun way to break things apart, and we're going to want to do that, right?
It's
And then
smashing.
smash things apart, yes, what everyone wants to do. And then sort of the second half plan will be to create a variety of MoGraph scenes. So I thought instead of just making one scene, because there are so many different effectors, so many different fields, so many different ways of setting things up, it would be more fun to do like a whole bunch. And so if you guys have checked out the project files, you'll see that there's, I think, 3 different scenes on there. So we're going to try and build all of those from scratch. But if not, we can always like see what the time says and break them down really quickly at the end, or if we don't get through to all of them.
Because don't forget that
Okay.
you guys can ask questions to us all the way through if there's something that you guys aren't understanding, or if there's something that you need us to repeat potentially, then let us know. That's the part of these interactive webinars. If you're new to this one, or if you're not, you're probably sick of me saying, ask us questions.
Yes, definitely. And morning to everyone, or afternoon or evening, where you're all from.
Or good
So,
night.
morning to Charles. Hey, Anders. Hey, Leepa, Jonathan, SW Johnson. Yeah, what I'll do, if you guys are asking about any links, as soon as Matt gets started and his bit, I'll make sure I link you guys to all those files and the YouTube videos as well. So, Matt, as a quick intro, because we have so much to show, we just want to get into it.
That's it. So I'm not ready. So we need to take longer. Do you want to throw the screen at me then?
I will. Right, there you go. And yes, as Matt said, pop your questions in the chat, and yeah, we'll answer those as we go.
Obligatory question. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hooray! Right. Okay. So as Elly has just said, the MoGraph workflow has a very particular application it's workflow in that there are 3 different things that we need to look at. I'm going to break this down so that we look at probably only one of the things, which is the cloner, and then the rest of the so that you guys can get the principle, and then the rest of it will largely be Elly showing you the different things. But there are three main sections to the workflow for MoGraph, and you have to start with a MoGraph generator object, which is one of these things in green. Okay, so one of these is a MoGraph item, and it then turns something into a MoGraphable item, if that's a word, but a MoGraph generated item. You know, we're going to be looking at the cloner and the Voronoi today, but you know, the workflow will work pretty much the same with those. That's the first thing we'll look at. We're then going to look at these blue ones over here, which are the effectors, and they affect things. Again, it will become more obvious when I actually start affecting things. And then we have fields, which are these pinky things over here. So these are the three things that we're going to look at, and you can't really do MoGraph without looking at all three of these things at once. So it can get a little bit confusing when I jump between one and the other, but bear with me, and we'll do our best to make sure that you understand the principles of them. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to look at my MoGraph generator object, the cloner. Okay, the cloner does exactly that. It creates clones of things. So let's create something to clone. Let's create a sphere. It wasn't a cube for once. Now I have my cloner and I have my sphere. Because the cloner is a generator, as we looked at generators in week 2, you know that we need to put an object inside the cloner to make it generate. So drag and drop the sphere into the cloner, and funnily enough, we have a set of clones. Now, very simply, by default, my cloner has some little orange handles, and you'll be used to these orange handles from when we did parametric modeling and various other things. The middle handles allow you to control, in an organic fashion, the size, the overall spread of the clones. There are corner dots as well. And what these corner dots do is actually allow you to create more clones. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. There is the drag and drop that corner, which is quite nice. There's the drag and drop that corner as well. I'm not quite sure why it's changing height. That's interesting. Let's just reset that. Boop. Okay. Or if you have a specific number and a specific distance you want to set, over here in the cloner object attributes manager, we can choose the number of clones we want. So let's make it 10, and let's go crazy. This is a grid system, so let's go 10 by 10. Woohoo! If my maths is all right there, we've now got 1,000 clones. There's 1,000 spheres all sitting there on my screen. And we can choose the size per step, which means let's make it 250, 250, 250, which means that the center of these spheres, and that's the axes, is 250 centimeters apart. It's not the gap between the two spheres, it's the gap between the central axes of those. So that is what we call per step mode. I can change this to endpoint. And what this does, this says this is the maximum size that I want my cloner to be. And if I increase the number of clones in it, then they squidge in. So the size is the same, but the number of clones that are in there increases or decreases. So that's endpoint. Whereas if I did per step and I increase it, then it will get bigger because it is increasing every time it adds another count. It adds that step onto the outside. So that is one way that you can use the cloner. This is in its default setting of grid array. We have a linear size as well, a linear mode as well, which allows you to, funnily enough, just create clones in a line. And again, I can choose per step or I can choose endpoint. You can see that that really wanders off. Let's bring that back a bit. Let's make it closer, and then let's go. There we go, and we're making clones in random directions. So this is a linear direction, and you can control it more by going further away or up and down or left and right. You can even do scale. So if you wanted it to get slightly smaller per step as well, then you can. And it will continue, it will get smaller until it gets to a point which is quite weird to do with maths, when it inverts. So you can see that at one point it gets so small that it starts going the other way, and then will continue getting bigger the other way. This is an interesting thing when it comes to scaling things using the cloner that way. Anyway, so let's just set those at 100. And you can control their rotation, not that you would be able to see it at the moment because it's in the sphere. So let's swap that out, because this is what you can do. Let's create a cube and put the cube in the cloner and get rid of the sphere. Although before I do, look what we've got. I have cube, sphere, cube, sphere, cube, sphere, cube, sphere going all the way along. And this is because it is cube, sphere. And if I wanted it the other way, it would be sphere, cube. And that's the way it would clone just by default anyway. I'm just going to get rid of the sphere so that we've just got the cube. And then if I change my angles, you can see that the whole thing twists around, which is quite an interesting effect, really. Whee! All for the per step as they all turn around and move for the information that we have being provided by our object tab for the cloner in linear mode. We have a radial array, which is a different way of doing that. I'm just going to grab my orange handle, which funnily enough produces a radial array of the clones. And I can increase the number of clones that there are. I can change the start angle from 0 to 100 or minus, so I can start further round. I can increase the radius or decrease the radius. I can choose the plane that it's created on. I can even choose an offset so that how far round it goes, or offset variation once you've got an offset, and then it will randomly distribute the cubes around the outside. So there's quite a bit that you can play with there if you particularly want to, but that's the radial array. Of course, we had the object mode that we looked at last time. So if I just create a sphere, and let's make that sphere huge. Under my clone, it says what object do I want to clone to, and let's clone to the sphere. And now you will see that I have tiny cubes dotting the surface of my sphere, which I can increase dramatically. I can choose to have them on the surface, so it's a random distribution. I can have it per vertex. I could have it per edge. I can have it in the polygon center. I can even fill the volume, which is what we've been previously looking at. So there are quite a few tips and tricks that you can use the cloner for when using it on an object, which is quite nice. There are a few different things that you can do. It's an incredibly versatile tool. Our generator is our cloner. And then the grid array, which is the first one that we were looking at. Let's get rid of the cube, that now. And you've got a honeycomb array, which funnily enough produces a staggered honeycomb, which is great for, creating honeycombs or bricks or paving or walls and things like that. And that's the cloner in a very small nutshell.
I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yep, I thought that might be a good point to stop.
Cool. So the first one is, can the cloner go to infinity and beyond, in brackets, or does it have to have values?
It has to have values. You can't increase indefinitely because Cinema can't handle infinity. That's not a number it truly understands. So you need to set values to it, and you will find that if you tried to do 1 million all the way across, Cinema 4D may struggle a smidge depending on what it is you're trying to clone.
Yeah, it handles clones very well, but yeah, it has its limitations to the amount of geometry. Okay, cool. Another one. So Anna's having some issues whenever I scale an object, before putting it into the cloner then resizes it back to the original scale, and then I have to resize the cloner. How do I keep the object from resizing? It shouldn't resize if you have just the cloner.
Yeah, it shouldn't. Is the answer to that one. It shouldn't do that at all.
Scale values in the cloner. So I'd recommend delete your cloner, get a fresh one, so it's all default.
Yeah,
and then drop it in, because it shouldn't resize.
If you're using the scale, which is a slightly different thing because you're scaling the model, or no, that should work. No, I don't know. I don't know why you'd be having that issue. I've not seen that.
Try kind of clearing out your cloner and get a fresh one and see if you still have the same issue. And if you do, let us know and we'll try to figure it out. I've got another question.
Of course.
Can you scatter objects based on points with the cloner?
Yes. That's what we did with the sphere. So if I make that sphere, I'm going to bring that back down from 1,000 clones. There is my that. So let's put this back to object mode and let's view our wireframe. So in my cloner, let's map that to that. And in my cloner, rather than polygon center, we can choose vertex, and that is the number of points. So if I take my sphere and it's got 16 polygons, so let's times by 2 to get more polygons. I get more points, therefore I get more clones. And you can also do it to splines as well if you want to.
After scaling or moving an object, how do you get the little dots back to modify it? Could you just show how?
Yep. So you need to make sure you are on the cube, and then you are on object mode, and then you are on one of the move, scale, or rotate tools, and that will give you the orange handles. The original clone disappears when my cloner is on. So if I turn off my cloner, then I can go back and edit my original and turn it back on, and now I will have spiky cube, spiky spheres.
Cool. I just had another one coming in, which is quite a good one. What are the limitations / advantages of the different instance settings in the cloner? So instance, render instance, multi-instance.
Good question.
So multi-instance, I think it's multi-instance, doesn't work with dynamics properly.
Right. And then render instance will be a direct copy. So if you want to really know and probably go into more depth than I can probably go into right now, right click, go to show help.
Yeah. So if we're looking at advantages, so what's happening? So instance is it's instancing the same object again, whereas a render instance, your playback and your scene will be faster because it's just like a render instance. And yeah, multi-instance, is it multi-instance doesn't work with dynamics, or is it render instance?
I can't remember which way around it is, if I'm perfectly honest. I always use render instances for effects, e.g. dynamics. So a render instance will do that, but a multi-instances won't.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
There we go. Anything else?
Yeah, I think that's it for now. Yeah, anything else that comes in, I'll let you know.
Right, then let's create a new scene, funnily enough. So let's create a cube and a cloner, put that in there, and let's make this 25 by 1 by 25. Let's make the per step 250, 0, 250. Wrong way around. 1, 25, bang. Hurrah! So that is a cloned cube 25 by 1 by 25 with a size of 250, 0, 250, which means that there is a little bit of a gap between each of these cubes, which is exactly how I want it. So this is the cloner. This is a MoGraphable object. As I've said, there are a few others, and we'll look at the Voronoi, but the principle is the same. So I can do some things with my cloner. As you've seen, I can change the sizes, I can move them around, I can spread them out. But what if I want to interact more with the clones? What if I want to affect them? Hint dropping. Then we need an effector. So with my cloner selected, because then it makes an automatic association, I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to have a look at some, well, I'm going to look at one of them at least. all of these effectors that we have here, they do exactly that. They will affect the clones, and they will do it in different ways. You can affect them based on sound. You can affect them based on time. You can affect them based on a Python scripting if you really want to get involved in that way. You can push them apart. You can re-affect things. You can do something very plainly, which is what I'm going to do. So with the plane effector, I'm going to do that. And you see instantly my cubes jumped up a smidge. If I turn off my effector, down they go, on up, down, up. Why do that, I hear you say? Why not just move the cloner up? Well, good point. So let's have a look at my plane effector, and let's have a look and see what it's actually programmed to do. And I can do that by looking at my parameter. And my parameters at the moment is adjust the position of the clones, 0 on the X, 100 on the Y, and 0 on the Z. Let's make it a bit more obvious. Let's make that 1,000. Wait, now if I go up and down, there we go. It does that. I can also change the scale. I can also change the rotation. So let's click on the rotation as well, and let's choose 90 degrees. No, let's not choose 90 degrees. Let's use 45. And I need to turn my effector back on. There we go. So you can see this is the original location of the clones. I put my effector on, and my effector has turned all of the clones 45 degrees and moved them 1,000 centimeters up. Not the most exciting, I'll grant you, of things that you can do with your clones, but this is an example of getting you used to it. So we have a clone, we have a MoGraph object. I then affect the MoGraphed objects with an effector. But as you can see, this is having an effect again on all of my clones all at the same time. Well, what if I didn't want it to do that? What if I want to choose where the effect is having an effect? To do that, we will go to my last tab, which is called a fall off. And this fall off literally means where will this have an effect? So very similar to when you're using paint brushes and it's, you know, in Photoshop or digital art programs, and you've got it's 100% in the middle and 0 on the outside, that it will have a gradient between really hard and 100% brush stroke and 0% to give you that nice fade on the outside. This is exactly the same principle. It is where do you want stuff to be affected versus not affected. So with the fall off, you see that I've got access to my linear field, or my fields drop down here, which is the same as my fields drop down here, but this one automatically associates it with the effector that I have selected. So let's create a linear field. Click that button and bang. There we go. I have now 3 stages of my object. I have 100% affected up here because they're green and they've turned 45 degrees and they're higher, and the 0% affected. I also got this middle ground, which is halfway between the two. And this is thanks to this field. This is my field, this orange thing, because I have it selected. If I deselect, you'll find that it is, of course, purple. And by default, it has associated itself with the plane effector. It's got our famous orange handles, and this is the area of effect. So this line here denotes 0% affected, and anything behind it is unaffected, as you can see. This line represents 100% affected, so anything on this side of it is 100% affected. And because this row of clones is smack bang in the middle, they are 50% affected. So let's see what happens if I spread these out a bit, and you can see nothing at this point until it overlaps the center axis point of these clones. And now if I spread these out, you will see that I now have a gradient of these, and I can completely expand it out. And if I move them, you can do that. They'll change because obviously when it's affected, depending on the position of the actual linear field itself, if it is on this side of the 100%, it will be 100%. If it's on the other side, it will be 0%. So you can get some really interesting effects by simply moving this thing from left to right. And this is where fields makes all of the difference to where you can affect your clones and what is happening. So let's have a look. There are three things that we have. We have the cloner, and this controls the clones themselves. Actually, we've got four things. We've got the object being cloned. So if I want to change the size of the cube, I can do that with my cube. So let's make my cube taller. Fine. If I want to choose the way it's being cloned, then I use my cloner, and let's make it 30 by 30. Okay, if I want to choose how it's being affected, then I use my plane. This is my effector, and I can say, let's make it 750 tall. And as well as 45, let's do 45 degrees that way as well, so it spins them all. Then I do that with my plane. And then where this is all happening, I choose with my linear field. So that is the process. That is the thing that you need to be aware of. Depending on what you want to change will depend on which one of these you need to click on to adjust. So there is all of a sudden three things that I need to throw at you in order to get this, but it's the only way that you can do it. Fields becomes really even more interesting when you look at the fact that you've got blend layers, because you can have more than one field affecting an effector. So let us create a spherical field. Now I have a very tiny spherical field. So let's increase the size of that spherical field. And now I have a spherical field that is also doing the same thing as the linear effector was. So wherever the spherical field was, those clones change rotation, height, and whatever. But you can choose how this blends. So at the moment it's maxing it out. I can do minimum, so it will only do it where the two overlay. I can do subtract, so that it'll take it away from wherever the original one was doing its thing. I can turn off the color of this one using the three color icon, and I can choose not to have the color being affected by that one and just roll those over. I can overlay and add them together, and so that it's maxed out by one and the other. It's, you know, there's quite a lot you can do really, which is a really interesting way of manipulating clones, adding things around, moving them, and being able to affect clones. You can even do things with a random effector as well, sorry, random field. So let's turn off those two fields for the moment, and let's turn on a random field. So this is the only thing now controlling. I've turned the other two off from here and here. The random field, which is basically a large noise map, is now choosing a random distribution of a linear effect. So the linear effect is that they will either be up or down, but this is a random distribution of that. And my random field can change. I can increase its scale so that it can be a bit wavier. I can choose noise, I can choose random. I can just randomly press that. And it's a really interesting effect. To be able to completely change the way this stuff happens. And now maybe, okay, let's add the spherical field back in. Let's move that to the top. And now I can overlay the two. So wherever the spherical field is, the random effect, the random field of the plane effector has some form of effect. And that, again, in a very small nutshell, is fields with relation to effectors when it comes to MoGraph. Is that a good place to stop and see if we've got any questions?
Yeah, so I've only had a couple, but if anyone's got any questions, let us know, and we'll get to them. Dan was asking, could you make the spherical field a child of the linear to allow them to move together? Or could you put them
Yes,
in null?
I think you could just actually do that, so that if you move the linear field, not that my linear field is currently doing anything.
You can
But then
there is a group field which allows you to if you add the group field in, you can then add fields to that group and then it works in that same way.
Like that? Or can you do it that way?
Yeah, if you see in there, yeah, you drop them in there. But that's like a different way of creating the scene. You would create your group field, and then you create your fields inside of there. And then what's great is you can then just duplicate your group field to another like setup.
Oh yeah, so if I move my group field, then it will do that as well. But obviously everything's really super tiny now, so.
Let's have a little look. So yeah, just some people saying mind blown, a linear effect's really cool. So because we haven't really got any other questions, really quickly, so Anna sort of let us know the problem that she was having with the cloner.
Okay.
So she's making a cube, and so I don't think it shouldn't be doing this. Basically, she's making a cube, she's scaling it down, dropping it into a cloner, makes the cube a child of the cloner. So scale it down, grab a cloner, make it a child, and then apparently the cube is then going back to its original size, which it shouldn't be. I would double check, make sure it is definitely going.
I would make sure you just figure out how you're changing the size of something as well, what tool you're on. I'm just trying to think what may or may not affect that.
Yeah, if it's just straight default, then
yeah, I mean, you should, oops. I mean, you should be able to change the size of them that way. You should be able to change the size of them that way. I don't know if that makes a difference. Yeah, if you're on object mode rather than model mode, I think that might be what's happening when you're scaling. So make sure you're scaling on model mode, and that should do it.
Cool. I think we got an thank you. So I'm hoping maybe that's done it. I've got another couple of questions. So back to when you were using the spherical field, can you make the edge of the sphere's impact not so drastic? Is there a way to diffuse it? So is there a way to, add that more of like a gradient blend, perhaps?
Yep. So if I just turn off my linear field for the moment, you can see my spherical field has an outer rim and an inner sphere, and you can control whether or not it's that harsh so that it's a zero, it's sort of like 50% in the middle to there, or make it 0 so it's much more subtle. Oh, you can go back the other way, I didn't know that. Then you can get a real sort of gradient instead, much smoother curve.
Yeah, nice. Can a field move along a path? So can we align to spline a field?
Yep. A field is exactly the same in any other way as Cinema 4D's objects. All you would need is a spline, and as we looked at last week, you would need the align to spline expression and the spline with which it needs to align to.
Cool. Greg was asking, can you use a mask to change the image of the field? I'm not sure what you mean by image.
I don't follow.
Field,
no.
But I think, but you can use masking in the fields menu. If you click on one of the fields, or you're going to go to the group. You're going to go to the group field now.
Remapping. Remapping.
Yeah, so you see, oh my god, I'm like pointing at the screen. So you see where it says clamp?
Yes.
The button to the right.
Oh.
That is
yeah.
like, yeah, so you can click that and it adds a mask. Then you can add a field to that mask.
Oh, okay.
I've not messed with it a lot, but that is a way of masking.
Something to investigate then.
Yeah, but yeah, that is, so that's that little button there is like a mask button, and then I'm pretty sure you can then just make fields a child of that mask. But yeah, we weren't going to go too much into that level. But yes, you can. Right, let's have a look. Right, so could the cloner be used to create a crowd if you give it a series of animated characters?
Yes, in theory. Because the cloner will clone whatever you have inside of it, which is something I didn't actually show, did I? So let's create a cloner and let's create a cube. Let's put the cube in the cloner. Let's make the cloner 10 by 10 by 10. And then if I create a sphere and I put a sphere in there, we've got that, as I've said before. And let's create a, let's go for a cone. If we put a cone in there, then I get cone sphere cube. And that is where it starts. Cone sphere cube, cone sphere cube, cone sphere cube. And goes all the way across. So it will clone whatever is inside, and depending on how you group it. You can also choose the way these clone as well. So at the moment they're iterate, so it'll always go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 based on the order that these are in. But you can also change that to random. So it will now do a random distribution of spheres, cones, and cubes in the area that I have got. In theory, if I was to have a landscape, which is, oh god, that's Diddy. That's still Diddy. Why is that so small? There you go. If I was to create a massive landscape, which is too big for my cinema to deal with, and I was to clone, sorry?
I haven't seen that before.
Oh, well, it clipping out because it's too large. Yeah. You can see I can clone across it, and let's do a lot of clones, and it will randomly distribute cubes, spheres, and cones all the way across my landscape. So in theory, yes, if you had different objects in there that maybe did different things, you could have them spread out across a landscape. I'd be careful about how much animation and how high quality the topology is if you're going to do that with people, though.
Yeah. With fields, are there any issues with animating or moving these over time?
No, that's entirely what they're for.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so regarding the mask, Greg was saying, if you wanted the shape of a hand rather than a circle, and without kind of looking into it, the way that you could maybe do it is by using a shader field. And
Yeah,
in the
that's where
shader
I was
field,
going.
you can load an image. And so if you've got yourself like a hand, like alpha, like PNG or something, you could drop that into the shader field.
Yeah.
And then it would mask out that.
I don't think I've got anything
shape.
useful in there. Yeah, you could put in the image in here and then you could use that as the mask or
That's the best way of doing it.
field. Yeah. Anything else?
Oh, one more just popped in. Can you use a field to protect an area that must not be affected?
I'm assuming that's what you could do with a mask still, can't you? I don't quite how you use the mask. Do you use
subtract a field from another field?
Yes.
And then it would effectively be subtracting that field from the other, making it not affected.
Yeah. A couple of different ways of doing it. So I've never really played with masks for it, so.
No, I've used it like a couple of times before, which is how I know it's there. But yeah, definitely something to investigate though, for sure.
That's technically what this is doing. The spherical field is working as a mask against the linear field. So that's cool.
Cool, yeah, right, that is all the questions for now.
Cool. Right, in which case, let's move on to the Voronoi Fracture, because then I get to have a smashing time.
Hey.
let's find something to smash apart. So what shall I use? Let's just use something fun. Let's use the landscape object and let's turn it spherical. So let's make a giant meteorite meatball thing that's going to fall apart. Who doesn't need a giant meteorite meatball thing? As of course, with other generators, the MoGraphable ones, we have the Voronoi Fracture. So let us select the Voronoi, and this will, funnily enough, break things apart in the method of Voronoi. Voronoi is a mathematical term denoted that what it will do, it will distribute points randomly throughout an object, and then it will halve the distance between the points. So this is going to be very difficult without something to point at. Can I doodle? That's the question. Where is the doodle? So if I've got a point here, a point here, a point here, and a point here, between those 2 points, it will create a line. Between these 2 points, it will create a line. Between these 2 points, it will create a line. Between those 2 points, it will create a line. Between those 2 points, it will create a line. Basic, depending on where each of the points are, you keep adding. It will halve it and create this weird Voronoid cell looking thing. So that is something that you can use to smash things apart, which is really useful. So let's create I've got my landscape and I'm going to put my landscape in my Voronoi, and instantly I get this lovely, wonderful, multicolored, segmented object. And what this is doing, this is using that principle of those points, and I can have a look at those points by selecting my Voronoi Fracture and going to sources and point distribution. You can see there are my points distributed all the way through, not just the surface, but the internal structure of my meatball. And it is doing those crossings. It's giving you that Voronoi. You can increase the number of points that it does that by, or you can randomly change the seed of the random distribution of those to have a look through. One number of points, obviously the more segments, but that doesn't mean that there are 200 segments. It means that there are 200 points. And there we go. I'm splitting my Voronoi fracture into various different bits. I'll come back to the sources in a minute. So let's have a look at our object itself. So it's colorizing the fragments. This is done automatically so that you can at least see the faintest idea of what it is doing. You can offset these fragments. So I can slowly increase the outside and I can shatter my object apart. I can invert that function. So rather than where the segments are, I've got the gaps instead, which can give you a very interesting look if that's the sort of thing that you're after. I can turn that off. I can go back to hull only, which means that it will just do the outside and it won't do the inside, so it looks like it's a shell. And then you can increase the thickness, so it really will look like that there is a shell to it. Let's just make that 10 because of the size of my meatball. If you want to do something that looks like an Easter egg, or a cracked shell, or Ferrero Rocher I seem to have made here, you can use that as well. You can choose hollow only if you need to. If you've got a thicker object that you want to work with, you can play with that. If you've got stuff that's got holes, you can optimize and close holes as well. So that's a really useful thing. I'm just going to set that back to 0. It allows you to smash things apart. You can choose how it smashes apart with the point generator, as I've just discussed, and you can choose where those points are created. So at the moment it's uniform, which means it's uniformly random. You can choose normal, which is based on the normal of the object rather than a normal distribution. It is a normal. Inverse normal, which puts them all on the outside. And my favorite one, which is exponential, because exponential allows you to choose that you can bunch them in particular areas. So off, and off means that it doesn't do anything, but then I can choose, let's put them all on the plus X, and then let's put them all on the plus Y, and then let's put them all on the plus Z as well, which means they basically bunch in one small corner, which can make really interesting effects if you add these to dynamics, which you can do, and you start smashing things on the ground, which of course is copious amounts of fun. And of course your seed amount, you can change things like that. You can also choose different sources to create the points. So let's turn off that source material as a point generator, and I don't have anything else. Let's try something else. Let's create a plane. And I can use a plane to create geometry. If I have a look at the number of segments that there are in my plane, which is a 10 by 10, I can use this to create Voronoi fracture distributions. So let's go to my Voronoi fracture, let's drag and drop my plane, and plop, there we go. I have Voronoi fractures that are all nicely cube and segmented like that. So I have a wonderfully sliced meatball. And if you increase the size of these, you are increasing, of course, the size of the squares that create segments. If you move them around, you can choose that. If you add more segments to your plane, you will, of course, change the way your Voronoi fracture distributes these around. So there's quite a lot of versatility when it comes to the Voronoi fracture and doing things like that. And just for the giggles, let's create a floor, put my floor below, select my Voronoi fracture, select my floor, right click on my Voronoi. This isn't really what I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm just doing it for the fun. Rigid body, press play, and smash. There you go. There's minutes of fun with that one. But what we need to be looking at is, I'm just going to delete my plane and go back to my point distribution so that I've got my meatball, which I'm going to turn back to uniform. And let's see how this works with other things. So I can use effectors because this is a MoGraph object. This is a generator. These things, the fractures that it has generated, are a MoGraphable effectable object. So with my Voronoi fracture selected, I'm going to choose another effector. I'm going to look at the random effector. And the random effector does exactly that. It affects the clones randomly based on the parameters that you set it. So this maximum is of 50 centimeters in any direction. It will move these fractures. Let's increase the size of that a bit. Let's give it a bit more data for it to play with and distribute this information around. So there we go. It will now choose a random distribution of these clones anywhere up to 500 centimeters in any direction from its original value. Let's make it 1,000. So it spreads it out a bit nicer. There we go. I have my blown up meatball. But of course, it's destroyed them all in one big foul swoop. What if I want to control how this comes together? Well, what do we need again? We've got our MoGraph object, we've got our effector, we control where our effector occurs with our fall off. So once again, I'm going to create a linear field. And my linear field will be created, and you can see I have a 0% and 100%. And if I move my linear field from one side to another, I'm going to increase the size of that because that doesn't give me an awful lot of gradient. I can bring them together like that and reassemble my meatball of joy and wonder. Okay, and that's something that you can easily animate. For those of you who remember the animation things that we did, let's just go to the beginning of my animation. I can go to my coordinates. Let's just keyframe that, go to the end, move it that way and keyframe that. And now when I press play, it falls apart. Or if I want to, this is the clever thing, if I go to my linear field and I go to my remap, I can invert my remap. So this is the field remapping invert, which means it will now do the opposite. So it will bring the meatball together. And this is a really another useful thing. So this is a random field. The random field is just currently affecting its position. Let's try rotation. Let's add that in as well. Let's go 90 degrees in all ways. Let's have a look what that's going to look like. So not only do they move into position, but they also turn into position as well, which is a really nice thing to do. Now, what if I wanted to do scale? What if I wanted all of these things to start small and then grow, or so that it looks like they're kind of popping into existence to do that? If I was to choose a scale that these cease to exist, for example, -1, it didn't work. And this is because this is a random effector. The trouble is, with a random effector, it will choose a random number anywhere between that and -1 to choose the scale of my objects. So using a random field to control the scale of these objects will not work. What can I use to control the scale of these objects in a nice linear fashion? Well, it's a nice plane effector. So with my Voronoi Fracture selected, I am going to create a plane effector. And that one is also currently set to move all of its positions. So I'm going to turn that off. I don't want it to affect its position at all. I want it to affect its scale. So I'm going to put a tick in the box. I'm going to choose uniform scale. I'm going to do -1. And now all of my things cease to exist. This is because this is having a unilateral effect. Because if I look at my plane effector's fall off, there's nothing in there. So this is where fields come in as really handy. I already have a linear field that is moving from left to right. I'm going to click and drag my linear field into my fall off for my plane effector. And you can see stuff has already started to appear because of how far over I hadn't moved the linear effector. And now they grow into existence because of the linear field, the plane effector, sorry, and the random distribution of their position and rotation is done by the random field, both of which are controlled by a linear field. It doesn't matter where it is, it doesn't have to be a child, but nonetheless, both of my effectors have the linear field in the fall off, and it's doing its creation with one field, two effectors, and a Voronoi fracture.
Cool.
What have we got?
We have a couple of questions, yeah. So Dan was wondering, can you kind of tweak or change the remapping? So is that able to be edited?
Good question. You can increase and decrease its strength that way, and you can increase and decrease its inner offset. You can do clamping. I don't think. Oh, can you? Yeah. Yes, you can. You can completely control how your remapping shape is. That's an interesting look.
Cool.
Whoa. Whoa.
That's it, thanks. Good. Yes. Are each of these chunks new meshes by themselves that can be modified or edited later? Can they be exported individually as a single model or mesh, i.e. destroy a column model and each column chunk can then be edited and animated?
Yes, and I even did a tutorial on how to do that. There is a how to create a Roman ruin tutorial somewhere on Cineversity and YouTube that shows you how to do that. But yes, effectively, if I just take my Voronoi fracture and go into a new file. So with my Voronoi there, if I make my Voronoi editable, I have access to each of the individual chunks now. This is now no longer a whole. This is now all of my separate individual elements, and I will have to remember, you know, which one is named what. But yes, effectively, I can make these editable and deal with them individually afterwards.
Yeah. Would you use the Voronoi fracture to make a cloth tear into two pieces?
Probably not. Our cloth dynamics has its own tear functions and abilities in that as well.
Yeah, that's all the questions. Everyone's saying,
Okay.
Yeah, it's good to know all the answers as well.
Cool. Right, I think that's me done, isn't it then?
I think so. Yeah. Let me just close this down. Right, yeah. Shall I get into some
Yep.
some scene setups?
Throw the scene at you and see what we can do with these things then.
Cool. Right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to move this out of the way because it is always in the way for me. Right, okay. Oh no, I can't get to what I want to get to. All right, never mind. Right, so what we're going to do is hopefully in the next hour, I'm going to get through 3 scenes from scratch. And the first one is this was the little like hero shot that we used for this week, is we're going to kind of make this using Voronoi Fracture and a bunch of different effectors on here. So let's get into that straight away. And what I'm going to do, let me open up my project files. Yes, these are the ones, just so we can have a look at them, because I'm going to have to steal the Maxon logo spline from here. And let me, what am I doing first? Fractured logo. Yes, this is the one. Okay, so I'm going to grab the Maxon logo spline up here, which I basically just exported from Illustrator. And I'm going to go to File and New Project. I'm just going to paste that in there. For anyone who is following along, you can either grab the spline out of the project file in the Dropbox link, or use any other spline so you can follow along. So you could use like, I don't know, like a text spline, and you could write like your name in there or something, and then we can do the exact same thing. So for people who don't have the Maxon logo spline or the project files and are following along, just grab any spline now. Cool. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we need to turn this spline into geometry. And we know from week 2 that we can do that. We can turn splines in Cinema 4D into geometry by using our generators. So if I come up to my generators, I'm going to grab my extrude. And I'm just going to drop my Maxon logo spline, or whatever spline you're using, into my extrude, make it a child of it. And then now we have some geometry. My offset is way too big, so I'm going to, reduce that to 35. Because by default, it's on 100, and that's a little bit too big because my spline is quite small. Right, so what do we need to do now? Well, we need to create some fragments and create some pieces. And we know, because of what Matt just showed us, that we can use the Voronoi Fracture tool for that. So I'm going to come up to my MoGraph menu, and I'm going to grab my Voronoi Fracture, and I'm going to drop my extrude straight into there. And now I have my fragments. I have my pieces of geometry. So inside my Voronoi Fracture, we're going to come into sources, and I'm going to select my point generator, and I'm going to keep my point generator. I'm going to keep the default one, but I am going to up my point amount. So I'm going to, let's do 500 points just to see what it looks like. We can always adjust this later on or tweak it if we don't like the way it looks. Cool. So we have now our fractured pieces. So now if we take a look, oh, is that not up anymore? Oh no. Let's take a look at, I don't have it saved somewhere. Never mind. So we know we want to create these two fractured pieces on either side. We'll just do it from memory. So what I'm going to do, I need to now choose an effector that's going to create that kind of positional movement. And I want to create some random positional movement. So I know that I can use the random effector to create this look. So I'm going to make sure I've got my Voronoi Fracture selected. That's kind of the most important thing when we're grabbing an effector. Come into my MoGraph menu, and I'm holding my left click down, and I'm going to grab a random effector, and everything's going to go crazy. And that's because of our parameter. Our position is set to 50 centimeters on the X, Y, and Z, and it's affecting all of my Voronoi Fracture fragments. And that's because of two things. That's because 1, I haven't set up any fields yet, and 2, my position parameter is a little bit too hectic for what I'm after. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change my position values to 10 centimeters on both the X, Y, and Z. I may change these once I've added my fields, but for now I'm going to leave it on 10 centimeters. And now I can add my kind of like final step in the workflow, which is my field, or my fields. I'm gonna add 2. So for this, I used a spherical field. So if we grab ourselves a spherical field, we can now just position this exactly where we want it. So I'm just going to hold T and I'm going to scale it down. And then I can tweak this inside dot here just to kind of increase this sort of inner area. Okay, let's maybe put it up here a little bit. Cool. Now let's go back to our random effector, and I'm going to grab another spherical field. And what's great about this is it automatically gives me the blending mode that I need, which is really handy. So it's max because I want both of them to be working together. And then I'm just going to pull this one down. I'm going to hold T again. I'm going to shrink it down, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to position this sort of where I want it. Cool. So that's looking fine for now. I'm happy with how that looks. But I'm thinking maybe we need these pieces to kind of like look like they've kind of disintegrated a bit as well. And so as Matt said, it's not. So because I want them to scale down, I'm not really going to use my existing random effector, because as we know, it's going to kind of like randomly scale the pieces. So I can't necessarily say, okay, I only want you to scale them down, because a random effector is going to kind of scale them up, scale them down, scale them all over the place. So we can use the plane effector for that. So again, with my Voronoi Fracture selected, I'm going to come into my MoGraph menu, and I'm going to grab my plane effector. Everything is going to jump up by 100 centimeters on the Y, because that's the default that the plane effector does. So we come into our parameter inside of my plane effector, switch my position off because I don't need to affect any of the position. My random effector is handling all that for me. But I need my plane effector to be adjusting my scale. So I'm going to do, I might even change this. Let's do minus 0.5. And so again, it's happening to every single fragment. What I can do, I can drag. So I'm now in my plane effector, fall off, and I can drag my spherical fields into here. But what I'm going to need to do, I need to set my blend mode again. So now if I switch my plane off and switch it on, our pieces are now, as they're kind of moving away from our main solid Maxon object, they're now kind of getting smaller. And now I can kind of, if I want to, I can now be like, you know what, they're maybe not small enough. So maybe let's do a -7, minus 0.7 on my scale. Okay, cool. So let's go back quickly and have a look at this. So we're getting there, but we're also getting some slight little bits of cracking in here. And so we don't want to use one of our existing effectors for that, because our random is affecting our position and we have our plane affecting our scale. How can we kind of create this partial cracking that's also going to leave some of the rest of the object solid? So we can do that with another effector. So what I love about MoGraph is you can just add effectors on effectors and fields on fields, and it just adds to the effect and the setup that you're trying to make. And yeah, there's not too many limitations with adding effectors on. So let's grab this third and final effector we're going to use, and that is the push apart. And as soon as I let go of my mouse, everything is going to go flying in Cinema 4D. Yeah, and that's because by default my mode set to push apart, my radius is set to 100, and because my setup's quite small, I don't really need it to be on 100. So let's try 1 to start with. Okay, so on 1 we haven't really got any like breaking apart. Let's try 2. Okay, we've got a little bit. Let's go with 3. Okay, cool. So on 3 we now are getting some of these fragments that are sort of like pushing apart based on this 3 centimeter radius. So you might even find that's a little bit too much. Maybe we do like 2.5. I'm going to sit here for ages now to find the look I'm after. Okay, cool. I'm going to end with 2.8. Otherwise I'll be doing this too much. Okay, so now our push apart is, if I switch it off and switch it back on, we're creating these slight little kind of additional cracks going on. And when it comes to adding a texture, so let me really quickly find that shot again. Hero images, MoGraph. There we go. Right, I'll try and not close it this time. Right, so I use that push apart effector here to create just these slight little like cracked bits here, but then the rest of the object is still solid, apart from, you know, these areas where we want it to look like it's kind of coming apart. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about texturing or lighting all of these scenes, because I'd rather show you the setups. And I mean, you know, weeks 3 and 4, we looked at texturing and lighting anyway. So you guys know how to do that now. But what I am going to show you is how we can get this like dual texture effect, where we have one texture on the outside and one texture on the inside, because it is super easy using the Voronoi Fracture. So let me come back to here. So at the moment, if I hit render, let me just kind of see that here. So at the moment, we can see like our colorized fragments. So what we can do inside of our Voronoi Fracture, we have this selections tab. If I grab that, we have a whole bunch of selections, and these relate to polygon selections. So if we have an object in Cinema 4D, we can actually select, if we make it editable, we can select some of the polygons or faces, and then we can then set that as what's called a polygon selection, and then we can add textures to that selection. So we could have like a sphere that kind of is half one color and half another based on polygon selections. What's great about the Voronoi Fracture is it kind of does this for us. It does these selections for us, like automatically. So I want my outside faces to be one texture. So I'm gonna enable outside faces, and you might have seen we now have this strange little triangle tag now on our Voronoi Fracture, and this is a polygon selection tag, and this is storing all the polygons that are the outside faces of our Voronoi Fracture. And I'm also going to grab my inside faces. And now we have another triangle, which are the polygon selections of our inside faces. And so what I'm going to do, just for ease, I'm going to make a standard material, duplicate it, and I'm going to make, you know, one pink and one blue. Oh, cool. So if I drop this pink color on my Voronoi Fracture and then render, everything's pink. And you're probably thinking, Elly, I thought you were going to do one color and one another. Just wait. And if I drop the blue on the Voronoi Fracture, it's now just overtaken the pink. We need to tell Cinema 4D and tell the material which selection we want it to be on. So if I select my pink texture, so my first texture, if you come and have a look in the attributes, we have this selection option, and we actually have the ability to drop in a polygon selection. And so let me see which is which. Okay, so this is my outside faces. So I'm going to grab my outside faces tag, and I'm going to drop it in my selection, and you'll now see it says outside faces. And I'm going to do the same with the inside faces. So I'm now on my blue texture tag, and I'm going to drag my inside faces in. And now do a quick render. We now have this sort of like pinky red color on the outside and this blue color on the inside. So that's how I created that effect. So basically I just created like a marble texture for the outside, and then just this weird red red texture for the inside. Okay, so that was the first setup. So yeah, we used the Voronoi Fracture. So basically we started off with a spline. So, you know, if you have like your logo in Illustrator, you can bring that spline in. We then extruded it and turned it into geometry. We then fractured that geometry and broke it into other pieces by using the Voronoi Fracture. Then we used a series of effectors kind of all on top of each other. We used the random to kind of move the some of these little fragment areas away, and we used a spherical field to kind of really target where we wanted that effect to happen. We then used the plane using those same fields, those same spherical fields, to then make it look like our pieces were slightly dissolving. We scaled them down. And then we used the push apart effector with no field, just with a really, really low value in the radius to then create this partial cracking. So are there any questions on that setup before we get into the next one?
No, none. You've mesmerized everybody.
Well, you know.
Oh,
Okay, cool. Well, if there's no...
Greg's popped in.
Yeah.
What if you're using a JPEG for outside and material on inside? Is that possible? So you
Yeah.
could use a texture, an image texture, couldn't you, on the outside? That wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so it just depends on the textures yourself, but you mean like an image like this
Yeah,
sort
I
of
think so.
texture? Yeah. Yeah, so as long as you've set up your materials in that way, then yeah, that's absolutely fine. You can just
Ryan said,
make sure.
brilliant,
Yeah.
and you've got a round of applause for Anna. So well done.
Thanks, guys. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, if you have any questions or you want to see like anything, let me know. Right, let's get on to the next one because like they get better and better. That's trust me. Right, so we're going to, which one should I do now? I'm going to do the ripple because it is super cool. Let's drop that in there. So we're going to, if I just come out of my camera,
Ooh.
we're going to create this ripple effect because, you know, it wouldn't be MoGraph without creating some kind of cool animation. So we're going to create this really cool ripple effect. Let me, right. New project. Cool, right, let's do this. Let's get into it. Right, okay, we're going to start off by creating that kind of like grid of hexagon shapes. And the way that we do that is we can actually grab a cylinder and then we can adjust our radius. So I'm trying to remember, I think about 5 by 50 we're going to go with. And then the way that we get that like hexagon is just by kind of reducing our rotation segment. So, you know, everything we've done so far, we've increased our segments because we like that nice rounding, that nice smoothing, but we can actually do like the opposite effect to create some like really interesting shapes. So if I put 6 rotation segments, we now have these kind of like this like hexagon going on. And what I'm going to do, just to make it a bit more aesthetically pleasing, I'm going to fillet this and I'm going to do a radius of 0.2. So yeah, so all we've done is we grabbed a cylinder, rotation segments at 6, and then done a little fillet on there just to give it that nice rounding. Right, now let's use the good old cloner. So I'm going to grab my cloner and I'm going to drop my cylinder into my cloner. Let's just sort of come out a little bit so we can see what's going on. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a honeycomb array for this, and it's going to give us this really nice kind of honeycomb effect when they're all really close together. But what I'm going to do, so at the moment my my orientation is set to XY, but we're going to look for like a XZ plane. So I'm going to go and select XZ, and these are now going to be kind of like a flat down. And I'm just going to sort of use these yellow handles just to sort of pull these in a little bit closer. And then I'm going to go to my 4 views. And so that's that little icon up here, little sort of like, looks like a bit like a minimize and maximize button. I'm going to click that. And then on my top view, I'm just going to click it again. And this is going to give me like a really nice like top view so I can adjust the kind of the position of these clones. So I'm going to use these yellow handles. You can use size, width, and size height if you want to, if you find that easier. But I'm just gonna eyeball it like this. Maybe something like that. And we're gonna add a whole load more, don't worry. And we're gonna go like that. Cool, right. It's looking good. And now let's increase these. Let's do 50 by 75. Okay, right, so we have our kind of main cloned hexagon shape plane thing going on. And now let's create the ripple. Okay, right, so the way that we do that is we're gonna grab a plane effector. And what we're gonna do, we're going to, so 100 is a little bit too much. I'm gonna change it to 25. And I'm gonna go into my fall off and I'm going to grab a torus field. So we can already start to see like the effect sort of taking place. Maybe we make this 50. Let's go 35. I'm gonna do it like in the middle. So we're gonna change, so our plane effector parameter, its Y position is 35 centimeters. That's a sort of, that's creating this effect here. And we're using a torus field to, you know, sort of define where this effect is happening. Right, so inside my torus field, my thickness I'm going to change maybe to 25. Just, yeah, that's the thickness of my torus. And then what we can do, we can adjust the radius. And I mean, you can see it taking place sort of now anyway. We're going to adjust our radius and we're going to set some keyframes. So we went through keyframing last week, but we'll do a little reminder. So first things first, I'm going to increase my number of frames because 90 isn't that many. And because I've got 30 frames per second on my project settings, this is only going to be a 3-second animation. And so it's all going to happen a bit too quick. So let me try 150 and we'll see what this looks like. But all this can be changed later on anyway. And what we're going to want to do, so I'm going to start off with a radius of 0. So I have no effect taking place. I'm on frame 0. So I'm going to set a keyframe, and this little kind of grey button here means that it's kind of keyframeable, which definitely isn't a word, but so I'm going to set a keyframe and it's gone red.
That's so a word.
Huh?
That's definitely a word. Keyframeable is definitely a word.
It sounds like it should be a word, but I'm sure it's not. It is now. Okay, cool. And then we're going to come to frame 120. And then I'm going to make this, we're going to have to go a bit bigger than 100. So let's keep increasing until basically it's gone entirely. So let's go 290, just so I have a nice round number. And I'm going to set a keyframe again. Right, so let's go back to the start of our timeline and let's give this a playthrough. Okay, so we're getting that initial effect. Do you know what as well? It's not actually completely gone. So I'm going to have to just set it to 300 and then reset that keyframe. So all I did there was I went back to frame 120, entered a value of 300, and then kind of set a keyframe. And what it does is it will just replace the previous one on that frame. All right, cool. So let's play that through again. Okay, cool. So we're getting that initial kind of animation happening. But let's now add some additional effects to this this plane effector and this torus field, and we're going to do that by using a couple of modifier layers. So if we grab our torus field, we're going to sorry, I totally lied then. We're going to go to our plane effector, which is where our torus field is, and then we can use some of these modifier layers, and these are going to modify how our field is taking place and how our animation is happening. So the first one we're going to use is this delay. I'm not going to go through all of them today. We're just going to have a look at a couple of them, but I'd recommend having a little look because they can do some really, really interesting and really fun results that kind of just add an extra layer to using MoGraph. Okay, so we've added a delay modifier layer and it is above our torus field, and that's an important thing. The order in which everything happens is quite key. And I'm going to change this to spring, and this is going to create that rippling effect. And so if we come back to the beginning and play this through, I hope everyone can see that it's creating, so the initial kind of torus field is coming out, and then the delay is sort of causing like this spring ripple effect to happen afterwards. And it's a really cool effect, considering we've only really just added a delay effector and changed it to a spring. We haven't had to worry about animating or adding extra fields or extra effectors. It has its own kind of like information and properties that does that for us. And I'm also going to set a decay. And what a decay does, it kind of just sort of like smooths and slows some of this motion from happening after the delay. So now as we play it through, we're now creating this really nice, smooth, rippling animation. Cool. So I'm thinking some like the plane effector is nice, but it's looking a little bit too uniform at the moment. And so let's add a bit of variation inside our torus field. And the way that we can do that is trusty old random effector. So let's grab the random effector, and everything's going to go a little bit crazy. And we're just going to throw in a torus field just to kind of see the effect that's taking place. And in my parameter, I'm not going to adjust my position, but I'm going to adjust my scale, and I've switched on uniform scale, and we'll just do a value of 0.5 perhaps. And then, yeah, let's leave it at that for now. And what we're going to do in my torus field, I'm just going to match the same kind of settings that I used before, or we could just use the same field effector, but let's just set it up again so it's in our minds. So back on frame 0, I've got a radius of 0, and this is my torus field on my random effector. And I set a keyframe, then at 120, we know that this needs to be 300 centimeters, the same as the other torus field. And now as we play through, we're now getting, so as the torus field comes out, we're now getting this sort of slight variation on our kind of like hexagon shapes. Okay, so the final kind of step for this, so if we go back to this one, we kind of have two going on. So we have the first one happening, then we have the second one happening. And so what's really fun and really easy about this is we can actually just grab our plane effector and random effector with our torus fields in, and we can just duplicate it. So we can hold down our command key and click and drag, and it's going to duplicate this exact same setup. And so what we can do inside my torus field, I can move my keyframes so it happens a little bit later. So let's just click and hold, and let's go 15 frames later, and we'll have it end 15 frames later. And we're going to do the same thing on our other torus field. So I'm just going to drag this little keyframe icon here. And there's one other thing we need to do first. So if I go back to my cloner, inside my Effectors tab, we can see we have the plane effector and the random effector. These were the initial ones that we set up. However, it doesn't have our plane one or our random one, and so it's not going to work. So if I play it through, we don't have our secondary kind of ripple happening. what we need to do, we're going to drag our random in, and we're going to drag our plane in. And then now as we play through, we now have our second ripple. And what we could even do, we could go into here. So you don't have to worry about this bit. This is, I'm just going to change the color just so we can see the difference. There we go. And so you could add multiple of these. You could add even more. Just make sure you drag them into the cloner. And then you could also kind of, if you find that they're a bit too close together, you could just tweak the keyframes on the torus field to kind of have a bit of an extra gap in between if you wanted. So let's do that. Let's put that onto 30 and that onto 30 just so we can see what it looks like. Oh, no, I can't get it now. There we go. Cool.
Excellent. That's such a cool effect. I really like that. I wondered how you'd done the duplication. Like, I wondered how you'd done the second color. I was like, was there something about delay effectors I didn't know that you could do? And then you just copied and pasted. I was like, right, okay, fine.
Yeah,
The simple one.
Unfortunately, not quite as elaborate.
We've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Are you able to make a field a custom shape? Yes. What you can do, if you have a piece of geometry that you are using, you can actually use that piece of geometry as a field. So if Elly was to create, I don't know, make the meatball, the landscape, and then make it spherical, just so it's an odd shape.
Okay. Spherical. Wow, that's absolutely massive.
Yeah, it's huge. If you then go to, I don't know, one of your effectors,
yeah,
and you can drag and drop that landscape into the fields area, and it basically says, okay, what do you want it to be? You can see that if you move that landscape around now, then it will have an effect. So if we hide that landscape but don't deactivate it, we've got the ability of moving that landscape around. And if we go back to the effector and select the landscape, we can choose whether that's the points of the outside of the landscape, whether it's the surface of the landscape, or whether it's the internal volume of the landscape. You can tweak it. So if you've got your own geometry, you can use it that way. We had a quick question about going to keyframes. So when you're moving along the timeline, if you want to go to the next frame or the previous frame, then it's F and G on your keyboard. F will go to the previous frame, G will go to the next keyframe. Yeah. Dan asked the same thing as I did. Is there a way of making the color change on the delay effector? But then you showed us how you did it with the second torus. So that was that one. We've got a question, which is, how would you get audio beats to control and influences the field that Elly is making, which is something we are sneaking our way towards, Jonathan. Don't worry, we're getting to how to use the sound effector. Yeah. And a question, as it ripples, can you follow with another plane effector that acts as an animated mask to give the appearance of deleting honeycombs across the same path as the ripple? Or is there a better way to achieve this in MoGraph? So if I'm understanding it right, if you wanted the honeycombs in the center to disappear as the two ripples go out, I would probably use a spherical field and a scale effect in a plane effector with scale, so that increased in size after the other two toruses have moved, but with a scale thing. So I think Elly knows what I mean. She's about to show you.
Yes, I think I know what you mean. Right, so I'm going to do the same like setup. I've just basically copied the cloner and everything. Plane effector to create my normal ripple effect. Let me just, what did we go? We were in 35, didn't we? And then I used my torus field. So this is what you're thinking, right, Matt? Same setup, but then use the spherical field to then erase things after, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. What am I wanting to do? Right, torus field. I'm just going to leave everything as it is really for now, just for the sake of this. Make it a bit longer. Right, I'm going at a faster pace just to kind of demonstrate this. Right, so set a keyframe at 0. So I'm just doing the exact same thing I just did by setting up this animation. And then inside my plane, I'm going to throw in, where is it? Delay, spring, and then we can just validate decay. Let me just check this. Okay, and then we want to erase. So once the ripples happened, we want to erase the inside ones, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's what we mean.
Okay, so I'm going to do that. I'm just going to grab another plane effector. And I'm going to set my parameter to -1. Going to delete everything. Cool. And then I can use a spherical field.
Yeah.
And then I can do the same thing as I did with the torus field, and I can animate my size. Right, so let me go into frame 0. No, I'm not. I'm going to go on to frame 10. When does it start to happen? Right here.
My guess is about frame 30 after because you've got the ripple and then you've got the delay.
Yeah, okay, right, let's go 30. And then by 90, no, we want it to be a bit after, don't we? So
I'd say by 120, the end of the animation.
Increase this a bit. So by 120, we want it to be
slowly there it is.
Oh my god, how big. Right, okay, let's give this a play. Okay, yeah, so that's the effect. It would just need like tweaking if you want it kind of perfected.
Cool.
So yeah, the first plane effector is creating the ripple effect, kind of all our hexagons going up using a torus field and the delay and decay. And then our second plane effector is kind of scaling everything down by a value of 100%. And then we've animated the spherical field to get rid of that.
Yep, exactly what I was wanting to understand. Thank you. So you're welcome. We're glad we could answer that one.
No,
that's
cool.
it.
It's cool, like having a question like that and then having to create it.
That's cool. So back to you for the next one.
Okay, cool. Right. So we're doing good, like time-wise. We're doing good. We've still got half hour. Like we can show some more things. But that's the joy of MoGraph. These things are kind of, once you know how they work and how they function together, it's quite quick to create these nice setups. And I mean, I know we're not texturing and lighting, which is a big part of it, but hey, tools are good fun to use. Right, so let's have a look at what we're going to create next. Back into my project files. Okay, let's go with this fractured logo. Fractured logo? No, wait, logo morph. Yeah, let's grab the logo morph. Physical redshift, let's go physical. Okay, right, let's have a look at this. So it's gonna be a little bit laggy because we've got MoGraph and Dynamics going on. And then it goes into the Maxon logo. Okay, so this is what we're going to create. Yes, because it's got dynamics as well with it. It's a little bit slower to play it back through the session, but hey. Right, so again, I'm going to, do you know what? I'm just going to grab my Maxon logo spline again, just so I have that ready. And so what we're going to do, we're going to define 2 different shapes. So for anyone who's following along, you can use like the Maxon logo, and I ended up with using it like an M text spline, but you can use whatever splines you want to use, whatever text you want to use, whatever shapes you want to use for this. And we're going to morph basically between the 2 shapes. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab myself a text spline. And so my first kind of shape that my clones were making up was the M. I'm just going to type in the letter M. I'm going to grab sort of a bit of like a blocky font because it's going to work. It's going to work well for it, I think. And I'm just going to align it to the middle. Cool. So I'm also now going to paste in my Maxon logo. I'm just going to sort of raise it up. And so for this, it's really handy if they're sort of similar in size, just because it's going to make the morph look a little bit smoother. They don't have to be in the same location though. We could have kind of one over to this side, one to this side, and they could like morph into that one. But I'm just going to have it morph in the same place, just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so now we have our two splines. So we have our Maxon logo spline, and we have our M text spline. Let me just write M text spline. So now we need to turn these into geometry again. And so what I'm going to do, I've highlighted both. So I've selected both and they're now orange. I'm going to hold the Option key and I'm going to grab an extrude. And what it does is it's clever enough to then put both of those splines in their own extrude. And now, because I haven't pressed anything else, I actually have access to the attributes of both extrude objects. And so down in here, I can change my offset. I'm going to do 35 again. It's working out to be a good number today. And what it's done is it's actually adjusted the offset of both my extrudes. So if I now just like click off of them, we can see that both now have an offset of 35. Okay, right. So I'm going to call this extrude logo just to kind of keep track, because we're going to be duplicating a couple of things. And so it's always handy to know which is which. And this is going to be my extrude M. I'm just going to deactivate my my logo extrude, my logo spline, because I'm going to work with the M first. Right, so the first step, well, the second step, is to now use this shape to define the shape in which a cloner is going to make up. And so I'm going to grab a cube, because that's what I make my shapes out of. I clone a cube. And I'm going to make it really small. So another little tip, if you highlight your X, Y, and Z, so I'm just going to click the X, and I'm going to hold the Shift key, Y, and Z. So they're now all orange, right? So they're all selected. I'm going to come into this top one. I'm going to put 20, but I'm not going to press Enter yet. I'm going to hold Control and then press Enter, and then it does all of them for you. I've also realized that 20 is now too big, so I'm going to do that again, but with 5 centimeters. Cool. And then just to make some nice rounding, I'm just going to add a little fillet, and I'm going to do a radius of 0.1 because it's so small. Okay, right, so now what we need to do is we want to clone these cubes in the shape of this M, and Matt showed us how we can do that using the cloner in object mode. So if we grab ourselves a cloner, because we want to clone our cubes, we're going to make our cubes a child of our cloner, and by default it's set to grid array. If I set this to object, we then have this object tab here, and we can now drop in our extrude M. So I'm just going to drop in my extrude M, and it's doing its best to clone the cubes over this M shape, but unfortunately we only have a count of 20, so it's definitely not enough. So I'm going to up this to, let's try 500 for now. And what I'm going to do, at the moment, it's distributing the surface, but I actually want them to make up the volume. So I'm going to select volume, and then all I need to do, because I still want to use the information of this M shape, I don't want to deactivate it because then it will no longer work in my cloner. But I can use these little kind of like traffic light dots here, and if I just make them both red, they're going to be hidden from my scene, hidden from my render, but their information is still within Cinema 4D for me to use inside my cloner. Okay, so I'm also thinking maybe this count is not enough. Let's go 800. Right, So that's looking okay. Let's add a bit of variation really quickly, and we can do that with our random effector. So with our cloner selected, I can now select my random effector, and in my parameters, we can just adjust our uniform scale. So I switched off position, then switched on scale, switched on uniform scale, and then let's do a value of, it's a bit too big, value of 0.5. So now we have a bit of like nice variation, and so we can now see our M shape that our cubes are taking up. So I'm going to name this cloner A, because we're going to end up with another one. And now I need to do this exact same setup, but for my Maxon logo shape object. So I'm going to switch these back on, and we can actually just kind of switch off this cloner A for now. And so the way that we can do this really quickly, because we've already set everything up, we can actually grab our cloner A and we can just duplicate it. We're going to call it cloner B, switch it back on, and inside my cloner, we need to make sure we replace this M shape for our logo shape. And now we can see that working. And now what we can do, we can just use our same kind of traffic light buttons here to just hide this. Okay, right. So we now have our M made up of cloned cubes, and we have our Maxon logo. But how do we morph between the two? How do we actually kind of create the animation? I mean, you could use a plane effector, and you could scale one down as one scales up. That's a cool way of doing it. But we could actually use a whole new effector this time, and that's the inheritance effector. What I'm going to do, I'm going to switch back on cloner A, and I'm going to hide cloner B, because we want to start off with the M, and then we want it to turn into the Maxon logo. So I have my cloner A selected, which is my M cloner. I'm going to come up to my MoGraph menu, and I'm going to use an inheritance effector. And you can kind of already figure out what the effectors do based on what they're called. And so what we can do with the inheritance effector, we can have it inherit another object, which is going to be our cloner B. So what we can do, inside my inheritance effector, we have this object option again, where we can drag and drop something in. And so we can drag and drop our cloner B, because we want to say, okay, cloner A, we want you to inherit the position, scale, and rotation of cloner B, which is our Maxon logo cube clone shape. So let's drag that in there, and nothing's happened for now, but we now have access. Now we've dropped that in there, we have this morph motion object checkbox, and as soon as I check that, oh, it switched into the Maxon logo shape. But that's good, that's what we wanted, because now we can actually move our strength slider of our inheritance effector to create our morph. And again, we have this keyframe option, so we can actually keyframe this animation. So on frame 0, I'm going to keyframe my inheritance strength. I'm going to start on 0% because I want it to start in the shape of the M. So I'm going to keyframe that, and then at frame 120, I'm then going to pull this all the way across to 100%, and now I'm telling it, okay, so at frame 120, I want the inheritance effector to be at a strength of 100%, meaning if we go back to the beginning and play through, we're actually animating a morph between our two shapes, or our two logos, or our two objects.
That's awesome. I love that one.
And the only other little additional bit I did, so I added dynamics just to see what it looked like. I mean, I like it. I quite like it like this. I think it's really smooth and really clean. but we can actually use dynamics on this as well, which is something we went through last week. So on my cloner A, I can just right click, and under simulation, we want to use rigid body because we want our cubes to interact with each other. So as they're morphing, they're actually going to kind of like, they're not going to intersect, they kind of just bounce off of each other until they eventually create this new Maxon shape. The only thing we need to do is to prevent it from falling through the sky, we can use this force follow position and follow rotation. And if we set a value of 10 in here, what it's going to do, the rigid body is going to, the dynamic's going to kick in, but it's not going to make it drop to the floor, but it's still going to interact with all the other dynamic objects. So now we've got that on there. Let's press play. So we can see they drop slightly, and now what they're doing, they're sort of fighting their way through each other to create this Maxon logo shape. So yeah, you can add dynamics with this if you wanted to, or you could leave it without the dynamics on for that.
Sweet.
Any questions?
No.
No.
We've had mind blown, time saver. People are generally happy with what you're showing them. That's good. I like the fact that they look like they're fighting each other to get to where they're supposed to be.
That's why I thought dynamics would be quite fun. They're kind of like, they're like people in a crowd, like bumping their way through. They all just need like googly eyes on now, and then it'd make me laugh for days.
Oh, that would be brilliant. No, we've had no questions, so that's really cool.
Cool.
I like that one. Are you going to go for the sound one? So I'm just conscious we've got 15 minutes left. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to.
Right. Then I was just thinking, oh, there's vertex maps and there's all of those, and it was like, there's just so much cool stuff.
Really badly. I've got a couple of vertex map setups that I would love to go through, but yeah, I don't think we have time. But
we're not going to have time. We've got 14 minutes now.
But you know, it just means we have more stuff to show when we do another one of these.
That's it.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, sound seems to be the one people want to get to. So I'll, in that instance, I will shut up and let you focus on sound.
Okay, cool. Right. So the first thing I want to check. So I've never tried sound through a webinar before, so I kind of want to check it works first.
Good point.
Yeah, I've never done that before, so I'm really hoping that it plays through. Otherwise, it's not really going to be that great. Right. So let me just get this. This was a little setup I made this morning. Did I even drop it in? Right, here we go. Cool. So let's test the sound. So let me know if you guys can hear this.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. Good sign. Right, okay. So let's take a look at the Sound Effector. Right, let's do a new project. Let's just, yeah, I'm going to do that same little setup that I made there. That one isn't in the project files, but I will link to how you can get, actually, you know what, I might just put it on there later. I might put it on there later. Right, so I'm just going to grab a cube and I'm going to make it 5 by 50 by 5. So I'm just going to create like a standard MoGraph setup here with a cube and a cloner, and then we'll look at the actual like sound effector and the different settings inside of it. So I haven't messed with it too much, but we'll all take a look together. Right, so let me just drop this into a cloner. I'm going to set this to endpoint, and then let's just do 50 by 50. Okay. Okay, right. So there's two different ways of doing this. So we have the sound effector, but we also have the sound field. So we're going to look at both. It's kind of the same thing. So let's go with the cloner. I'm going to grab my sound effector. Let's have a little look in here, because this looks a little bit different to your average effector. So we still have our parameter section, so we can still kind of define what kind of position, scale, or rotation we want our effector to be having on our cloned cubes or, whatever kind of MoGraph setup you have going on. And so for the sake of this, I'm literally just going to leave this position on 50 centimeters, just so we can see kind of what happens. Right, so under our Effector tab, it's a little bit different because normally we just kind of have this strength slider and then a couple of extra parameters. And here we have something a little different. So first things first, we need to define our soundtrack. And so what I did, so really quickly, there's this guy called Maxon who does loads of like royalty-free music, and you can actually use it for things like webinars. As long as you like credit him and tag him, you're able to use his stuff, and it's really nice, like tropical house vibes, which is definitely a bit of me. So yeah, shout out to him. So that's the track I'm using. It's called We'll have to find out. Right, so let's just load our soundtrack in. Here we go. So Maxon Wanna. And it's a WAV file that I've got. So I'm just going to open that up. And another thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to, so we can really see what's going on, I'm going to put 1,000 frames in. Okay, so now as you press play, let's get to a good bit. Right. Okay, so I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it's kind of like, it's kind of jumping a little bit. If I play it through, let me just turn it down a little bit, it's probably a bit loud. So if you guys can hear, it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of like jumping on each frame. And this is down to a setting inside our project playback in our timeline. So this is something you're going to want to do. You may not get that, but if you do, basically what is happening is what I think is happening is it's trying to play the track on every single frame. And so if we uncheck that all frames, now if we come through, right, so we're getting that proper playback now. So that's the first thing that you might want to do if you find it's not playing through properly. It's just in this project tab here, and it's kind of playing on all frames, so you get some weird like clipping happening. Okay, cool. So let's get back into, let's sort of increase this a little bit so we can kind of see this a bit better. Okay, right. So we have our soundtrack in there. And we have this amplitude graph. And what we can do, these little boxes, these orange boxes here are called probes. And the frequency inside of the probe is what is going to be generating our movement. And so we have, so we're going by frequency at the moment. And so, we have our low frequency, our mid, and then our highs. And so let's say we want one particular kind of range of movement to be on our low frequencies. We can just click and hold to move this probe around, and we can, use these buttons here that we're used to by now, just to kind of change the size of this probe. And then what we can do, we can add another probe. And this can then be, wow, I didn't mean to do that. This can then be like our lows, our highs, sorry. Get my music terminology out. Right, and what you might be able to see, if we sort of like come into here now, we can see we kind of have some of our cubes up and some of them down. And what they're doing, it's iterating between these two probes. So we have our lows happening and our highs. And if we sort of come into here and press play. So now, every other line is on either the lows or the high frequencies. And we can add, more probes if we wanted to. So we could add another probe in here, and we could have our like mids. And we could even change this to, we could distribute. So now we can really visually see here the three different probes. We also have blend, so it's going to blend between all of them. Yeah, so that's how, I mean, I would stick to probably distribute. So that's how, if you want to define those different areas, you can do. We can adjust the properties of the probe here. And we have like different options in here. We have like a decay. So this is sort of like a blend, sort of like the decay modifier layer works in that way. Yeah, and then again, you know, we have access to fields within here if you want to use fields within here. But if you're looking at using the sound to drive the animation, you may not want to then limit it with fields. We can then use it in a slightly different way. So let me get rid of my sound effector for that. And in my cloner, I'm going to grab a shader effector. I'm just trying to remember what I did for this. So I'm going to use my shader effector to adjust my position, and I'm going to add a noise. Okay, yeah, this is looking similar. Right, so I've got my cloner set up, and I've got a shader effector, which is, you know, just doing the position on the Y, and then we've used like a noise gradient shader to create this nice like wave effect. And then we can use a sound field, which is basically the exact same sort of settings that we just looked at. We can add our soundtrack again. And then we can add some more of these sort of probes. We can add another probe in here. Let's kind of make a bit more variation in there. And then we can add another probe in there. And then what did I do? Did I distribute or did I blend? So let me go to parameters. Let's instead, let's scale them.
That's cool. That's an interesting look, isn't it? A sort of soundscape of the depths of the frequencies that you've got.
Yeah.
There are so many different, as with so much with MoGraph, there are so many different ways of using the sound effector. If you have a look in our asset browser and you do a search for sound, I think it should be there. There's a few examples. Yeah, the sound effector by our UK guys. It's Simon. I forgot his name.
This one or this one? Which one? Which one?
The second one, I think they're both him, aren't they?
Let's have a look.
And you can use the sound effector as a deformer. You can get it to deform the points, so the points will bounce. You can get all sorts of things to be affected. These sound sort of scapes that he creates are really clever. Oh, why can't I remember his name? It will be on this file somewhere in one of the little bits. So like the spline wrapping round is a really nice one to give you all sorts of ideas of what you can do. Have a look and just do a search for the sound effector and see what you guys can come up with.
Yeah, so I think with this, yeah, it looks like the tracks are sort of split as well.
Yeah, Simon had so each individual track had its own individual sound effector so that he could affect each individual element based on what it is that he was looking at.
Yeah, I would say that would be the best way of kind of using the sound effector and getting the most out of it is if you have like your set, even if it was like your bass and then you had your mids and you had your highs, so you can like separate it all out and then have a different animation
Yeah.
or different like effector setup for those?
We've actually reached 4 o'clock.
I can't believe that. Do we have any final questions on any of that? You know, like we don't mind overrunning.
How do I access the recorded version of these? You can get the tracks from steps from Soundstripe. The recorded versions of how do we get the access to the recorded versions of the webinars? So you've put a link. Did you put a link in the chat?
I linked
Yes.
in the chat. Yes.
It might just be worth. I'm just going to copy and paste that again for the link to the project files. The project files are there, but the link to the
playlist
isn't there.
Is it not? Oh, okay.
If you just do a quick repaste of both of those.
Yeah.
Does the does the audio track render out as well when you render the animation?
Yes. Yeah.
How do I just import sound as background to animation and see it in the timeline? If you load up the timeline, so you can go to Window and Timeline, then if you go to Create, there is Special Tracks, and then there is a soundtrack. So if you want something to work in the background of your animation, then you can do it that way, and then you'll see the WAV file, the thing working in the background. Yeah, that's it. I mean, we've just been encouraged to overrun, but this would have been the first one that we ever overrun because there's so much to show. But
I literally could talk about MoGraph for
that's
too long.
it. You could do. It depends how quickly you could do a vertex map one, but I think we're pushing it really. So
probably every bit of me is like wanting to just like do more weeks of this, but we just all of this stuff that we haven't shown, all the stuff that we haven't got to over these weeks, we're just going to store, and then we're going to absolutely do more of these hands-on workshops, because yeah, we're loving it as much as you guys are, trust me. All right, cool. So really quickly, I'm just gonna kick this off, so we can go through what we're going through next week. So next week is the final week. The final, Matt, can you believe it's final week? It's mad.
that's gone really fast, hasn't it? I think it's gone incredible.
It's gone too quickly, yeah. So yeah, we're gonna like round it all off with all things to do with rendering. So we're gonna look at standard and physical renderer. So the two renderers that come inside of Cinema 4D. And we're also going to look at understanding AO and GI, and so that's ambient occlusion and global illumination. And so we've already looked at GI when it came to lighting with HDRIs, so we already have a little bit of knowledge on that. We're going to look at the render settings inside of Cinema 4D, and also have a bit of like a conversation between rendering stills versus rendering animation, and how you'd set up your settings depending on what you're creating. We might have a little look at motion blur, depth of field, and magic bullet looks, which is included inside of Cinema 4D. We're also going to look at multipasses, or in Redshift they're called AOVs. And then we're going to try and spend a period of time looking at Redshift, because we didn't really get to do any Redshift in the previous weeks. And yeah, we might look at kind of optimizing some previous scenes and see, you know, kind of like where we get with that. Really quickly as well, before everyone goes, I'm gonna just set off a poll, which is about which renderer you use. So this is going to help me out and help Matt out ready for next week. So yeah, basically, if you could just let us know which you use, whether it's like just standard Cinema 4D, standard physical, whether you use just Redshift, whether you use the two, or whether you use something else. You know, people use V-Ray, they use Octane, they use Arnold. This is going to help us out a lot ready for next week, so we know how much time to spend, you know, on the relevant areas. Yeah, so again, thank you so much, guys, for being here. It's so nice to have you guys live with us, asking us all your great questions. It's so much fun to like work out some of your questions as well on the session. And anyone who's watching us on the recording, thank you so much for watching us as well. And thanks again, as always, Matt, for your
You're welcome. No, thank you. That was fun. That was an enjoyable one. As I said, that's the trouble with MoGraph. Once you start, it's difficult to kind of really stop and slow it down, isn't it? You just like, we can do so much stuff.
So many project files and so many things that I wanna make, and then I
Yep.
get carried away. And all of these, yeah, I'll drop the Sound Effector one on the link as well. But all of these are there, so get them, break them down, change the stuff, set up some animations, and like always like tag us in it on, I don't know, Twitter, Instagram, or whatever. Like it's always nice to see what you guys create. Cool, yeah. So thanks to everyone who's done that poll, and yeah, we'll see you all next week for the final week. Can't believe it.
That's it. Should we close that poll off now then? Because I think
yes, I might close that down. Thanks to everyone who answered. I really appreciate that. Right, I'll just kick that off. Cool. Right. So yeah, once again, thanks to everyone for being here, and to everyone who is watching us later on. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and we can't believe it's nearly over.
Yep.
About it.
Have a good week, guys, and we'll see you for the rendering session next week.
Cool. Sounds good. Have a good one, guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.